Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddy Network podcast. My guest today is John Durrant from the UK, and I'm going to let him tell you about what he's interested in and the stuff that he's doing. So, welcome, John. Glad you're here.
Well, hello, Ed, and lovely to meet you. So, yeah, I'm John. I'm based in the UK. My sort of working life, I suppose, over the last 30 years has been primarily in technology. I spent 10 years on the sales side, on the commercial side, back in the 90s and the noughties. I I then went off and ran a business for 10 years, and that involved me building the technology to support that business. That was around the beginning of the era of the internet, and the technology that we needed wasn't really off the shelf. So I kind of, built it myself and learned to code. And so that was where I became a bit of a software engineer. And then the last 10 years I've been more professionally in software engineering. So I've been probably for about the last 7 or 8 years managing teams of software engineers. And my personal approach to that has been one of trying to marry technology with the human factors that are involved in working with technology. So my my take on it has really been to look at technology and software development as a technical and a social and a psychological discipline. So my conversations with engineers had always kind of veered off beyond the pure sort of day-to-day technical aspects of work. And I've always tried to look at the whole, work as an ecology. And I've tried to get into the heads of engineers in terms of understanding their inner world, their motivations and their desires, and also, what drew them to the discipline in the first place. So for me, it was the creative side of software in the virtual world. You can you can paint anything you want. You can indulge your creativity and create whatever you imagine from code. And that's what I guess kind of turned me on. And I think that with that comes this sense of craftsmanship and a sense of being indulging a sense of mastery. And um, I would always look at I was quite drawn to self-determination theory, which looks at motivation from a perspective of mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And those for me have been the keys to motivation. And I think that autonomy and purpose were always sort of quite easy to understand and to realize why they're important. And then this strange thing of mastery kept coming up. And I found that whenever I was having discussions with people, we could get an idea of what mastery was all about. And but it wasn't always, there wasn't always a consensus and a clear understanding of what we mean by this word. And um, so that's prompted quite a lot of research and investigation into this whole field of mastery, and has occupied, I suppose I've been sort of delving into it over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, but much more in the last year in terms of trying to articulate my own interpretation of mastery, why it's important, and why it's often seen, I think, as a kind of a little bit of an elitist, in terms, elitist sort of in terms of competency, and a sense of, that there's a limited range of people that could aspire to mastery. And I've tried to sort of look at mastery in terms of an attitude. And I think you've done a similar thing. So you talk about leadership, not as a role within a hierarchy. You talk about leadership more as an attitude and more as a natural
The function
thing.
of how we live.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm doing a similar kind of thing with mastery. I think that we can look at the essence and the attitudes and the care, the quality, the connection, and the meaning and the beauty and the power that comes from this idea of mastery, and think about, well, what does that mean in somebody's ordinary life? So I guess that's where where
So,
I've been
so
drawn to.
let me ask you this question then. Um, is there truly any objective standard for mastery?
Um, Again, I think that's quite vague in terms of a kind of a definition and a consensus on what we mean. So, what some people might describe as mastery is, in terms of competence. So it could be a certain level of competency that's recognized as, maybe we might call it excellence or whatever, but um, or you might have another viewpoint where mastery is a sense of effortlessness around a complex
Mm-hmm.
performance of, you know, whether it's in sports, music, or
Yeah.
craft or whatever,
Is that like
So,
flow? Is that like flow?
well, no, I don't think so. I think flow is more of a state of mind that might emerge when you feel connected to. I think that flow is something. I mean, that's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the
Yeah.
Hungarian
Yeah.
uh, thinker on this, and I think that the flow is probably something that would be emergent when you're applying a sense of mastery to something that's in front of you, and you can. And it's quite interesting the work that's been done in the extreme sports arena around flow and the sense that a rock climber, for example, is able to zone out everything else. Time passes. They lose a sense of time. They lose their sense of ego, and their sense of pattern recognition in terms of being able to kind of like understand the rock face and to be able to kind of intuit what's in front of them is much more heightened. And what it really is, it is applying that sense of mastery, as opposed to the the
Yeah.
task of climbing a
There's,
rock.
there is a connection, but they're not the same thing. That's what you're
No,
saying.
I think flow is more of a state of consciousness or a state of mind that and I think it can be measured by neurochemicals and the different flows and etc. But it's one of those things of life which is it's like the qualia of life. It's like it's ineffable. You know it when you experience it, but you can't really kind of say what it is and how to get
Yeah,
there.
I like that. Inevitable. That's a great word. That's a great word. I love that.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
So,
are- have you have you found mastery in your life?
um, so I think in some areas, I think what I've come to kind of the realization is that so for my definition of mastery is that it's an attitude that I could apply to an endeavor. And I think it's more, so I'm seeing it as more of a kind of a purity of attitude. So if I'm practicing the piano, for example, then am I doing that with a sense of intentionality, a sense of discipline and surrender to the process, and a sense of ritual and importance of what I'm trying to get to? So by practicing with that kind of mind, then scales are no longer boring. They're kind of they've got an essence
Yeah.
or a meaning. So I found that since I've been delving into this area, I've I've been able to kind of step into identity where when I'm doing things like that, I'm feeling like I'm I'm the following the path of mastery. Now, I'm still I'm not in terms of competency, no, I haven't achieved mastery in that particular domain, but I feel like I'm applying those principles that will take me in a give me that momentum.
So what would be the emotions that you would describe that would describe this sense of mastery?
I think it's that's quite interesting. I think it's something that the sense would be that regardless of emotional experience, I think that you have a kind of you're kind of in a groove that is taking you to a place. So whether you're on a good day or a bad day, you can get into that sort of mood, that
The,
that
the
ego
word
state.
the word that came to me was joy.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you feel joy, just saying that word gives me a sense of something complete, something fulfilled.
I
And
think that I think that true joy is something that you earn, and that joy is something that you experience after. It's like the difference between type 1 fun and type 2 fun, So type 1 fun being the hedonistic, in the moment, surface level stuff. Type 2 being, something that takes a lot of grit and persistence and hard work, but is much more rewarding once you reach a certain stage. So that it's all the same thing. I think it's all about, I think, trying to see something deeper within the everyday ordinary efforts of trying to just get better. And that's what I mean by sort of like making it something that's sort of accessible and important to people, and something that we should, you know, carve out time for in our work, in our life, and in our play. Um, so, and that's where I'm going with this. It's like, well, how do we have a mastery conversation at work? How do we have a mastery conversation in life, in relationships, in managing your emotions, or that kind of thing?
it would seem that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I'm thinking about how this applies at work. It seems that if you're going to apply this at work, then you have to be in a work setting where the idea of mastery actually matters.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
you're not there just to fulfill a rote set of tasks, but there is some value into becoming more proficient,
yeah,
as you say, or expanding. I mean, we could use my language of expanding the impact that you're having through what you're doing. That
yeah.
that, but you have, the structure, or the social structure, or the organizational structure has to be developed in such a way where that's allowed.
I think you're absolutely right, because if you look at the survey, I know that Gallup does a survey on employee engagement, and I
Right.
know that in the UK and I know that their methodology can be questionable and their motives might be questionable. So I'm not giving the results as fact, but I know that in the UK, I think the they came out with something like 11% of people are actually engaged at work, and the rest are disengaged, varying degrees of not being quite as engaged as you might like. So I think that if you value employees and their input, and if you value their experience, and you create an environment where a sense of mastery can be, talked about and emerges, then you get so many other payoffs with that. You would get the improvements in engagement, and you would get a that sense of connection to the the entire process. So, we currently have a in our sense of connection to what we might be producing at work is often pretty insufficient. We create throwaway products that have built-in obsolescence. We're just a cog in the machine, so we don't get that connection to the customer. We don't get that sense of community in terms of being part of an ecosystem. We're just often, we find ourselves in that sort of isolated situation of being a resource, more sort of still that industrial era kind of thinking. But to encourage a sense of mastery in a workplace requires the right sort of structures. So how do we, part of practice, if I'm practicing the piano, then I'm going to make mistakes, and I need to be kind to myself, but I make a mistake. But in work, we are often much more geared towards, performative, measures all the time, and being seen in the right way, and no matter what we say about failing fast and failing often, failing forward, the reality is that's not always the experience of somebody in the workplace.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's where I want to go with this thinking, is to encourage those kind of that kind of thinking and those kind of conversations.
So, are there a set of steps that we should take to master some field?
Well, yes. I so I've come up with a kind of a lens or an approach to sort of look at what kind of conversations we can have to encourage this kind of sense of mastery as something that we want to see emerging. So I've kind of come up with as much as I don't really like acronyms, and models, I've come up with a kind of an acronym that from the word aspire, so ASPIRE, and I'm using that as a container, and I'm seeing it more as a prompt, a way of kind of a tool to sort of prompt thinking around how you develop this sense of mastery. So A is for aspirations, and I'm distinguishing aspirations from ambition, in that an aspiration is something that it's a calling that you feel internally. It's a that sort of sense of a kind of a higher purpose. S is for systems. So it's the routines, it's the practice, it's the rituals, it's the habits, and those kind of things that build skill or competency. P is for paths. So it's the possibilities, it's the options, it's the next steps, and it's thinking about mastery as a path, something that
Uh-huh.
is, a path that might take you into a process of discovery, and it's a path that might involve summits and plateaus. So that kind of thinking about the journey, I suppose. I is for internals, so who we are as people, our ego, our identity, our inner game, if you like, our real world. R is for reality, and that is from the sense that we're not very good. We delude ourselves, we delude other people. Our perception of reality can be very subjective. So how do we get a real sort of evaluation of where we are and where we're going? And E is for externals, and we are. I think this is really important, sort of in organizations. We don't always see the organizational structures and the organizational incentives and the environment and the ecosystem that actually has a massive influence on our experience and how, on our path as a whole. So I'm using that as a kind of a framework to be able to have a coaching conversation or an organizational conversation about how we can look at the the probabilities of creating the conditions for mastery to emerge.
So we should aspire to mastery.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
There's the title of a book.
Yeah. I mean, how does that sit with you? What do you have a preconception of mastery, and does that line with your thinking around the subject at all?
Oh, I love it. I love it a lot. I just it just well, I felt joy. I feel joy when I think about mastery of being able to master something and feel like to feel the accomplishment of mastering something um, is a source of real joy, I think.
Yeah.
And I would also say that um, mastery, in this sense, the way you're describing it, is really a way to discover who we are, or who we are always becoming. Is a more contemporary way of talking about it. We're never just being; we're always becoming.
Yeah.
But the mastery is and um, we have to decide what what the what the qualifications for mastery are, because ultimately, I can't if I'm not going to take someone else's qualifications or someone else's conception of that and give myself to it to the extent that I would if I decided that I need to master this because there's something there's something tangible in this for me to achieve.
That's where I distinguish between success and ambition, which are usually kind of externally driven, and society, we look at society's norms in terms of what we think of as success, compared to allowing ourselves to have the space to work out, well, what is my what what threads are pulling on me? What are those unspoken, I feel them, I know them in the back of my mind. Real life is busy and hectic, but there's something that's pulling on me that feels like something I should be doing. It might not be what society wants me wants me to do,
Right.
but
Right.
and I think that's where we it's about unraveling a gift. It's about that, and it's like the old idea of having a daemon, a daemon, that
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure if that's the correct pronunciation. That sense of having a muse, having
Uh-huh.
having a a voice that's kind of calling you to a purpose that is expressed in us as a feeling about what
Yeah.
what our potential is.
I have.
Um, you have one,
Yeah. It
right?
doesn't talk very often, but when it talks, it hits me with a punch.
Right.
And um I'm trying to I think that the last time was 25 years ago. It spoke. Hasn't needed to speak since, but it
Okay.
told me it's time to stop talking about leadership and lead.
Okay. Okay.
And that was kicking me out of the proverbial robin's nest and forcing me to fly.
Yeah.
And my life has been totally different ever since.
And discovering your wings on the way down.
Yeah, that even had wings.
And
And they were eagle's wings.
was that one moment of kind of revelation, or was it more of a sequence of events that unfolded for you?
It was one moment.
Okay.
He was on
Okay.
horseback in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Well
Okay.
before I ever moved there, I was with my family, and we come around the corner, and there are these beautiful mountains, and I hear this. It's time to stop. I hear this voice. I hear this voice, and it said,
Yeah.
"Time to stop talking about leadership and lead." And so I decided then and there that I would everything that was placed before me of a leadership nature I would take on unless there was real reason not to, and that changed everything.
Wow. Yeah. Um, that's interesting. I've never, I mean, I've never had that experience myself. I've only had feelings and interests and things that grab your attention that you then reason through and you
I have all that. Oh, I have all that too. All of that's
yeah,
going on. But this was a definitive moment in my life. And everything before that was I lived in my head. And everything after that was I'm going to apply what's in my head in some kind of action.
yeah,
Really.
and
And that's really how I see mastery unfolding is
yeah,
through action.
yeah, yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. I'm really interested in experiences that people have that are slightly outside of what we consider normality, and
Yeah.
and it's very hard for people to talk about them. They're probably a lot more common than we think. Um, and because I know it's who's the is it William James who talks about he wrote the book he's 19th century psychologist, and he wrote the book about the what was his book? It was about religious experiences, or he used the word religious experience, but what he meant by it was anything outside of the norm.
Yeah.
And so it'd be anything from an out of body experience to a some kind of encounter or some kind of hallucination or a spiritual awakening or those kind of things.
Right. Right.
It's it's a fascinating area of life that we find it difficult to reckon with given our sort of upbringing and our rationality, I suppose.
Well, I would correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that most people enter into this pathway of mastery because they've been on another path which has been telling them that they can be more than what they have known themselves to be,
Yeah,
and whatever they've been doing is insufficient to get them where they want to be.
yeah, yeah.
And set of that sequence of ideas is really quite fascinating.
It it's interesting, isn't it? It's also where this uh, uh, this idea of well, where do ideas come from? What we have thought, continuous thought in your head. And I remember I did a 10-day Vipassana retreat, which was a silent retreat. It was you had no access to the outside world. You couldn't make eye contact with anybody. You couldn't speak to anybody. You couldn't take a book in. You had no technology. You couldn't exercise, and you had to spend well, it was 10 hours a day of meditation. And the idea of the meditation was to bring your focus to certain points. And but the struggle with that is that you're constantly bombarded with thought, and you can't you can't control that. It you can't fight against it. It's a continual stream, and it raises the question in me as well, where do those thoughts come from? Are they the result of in my brain there's 120 billion neurons that each of those neurons can connect to 1,000 other neurons, and you can create patterns within your brain that are so unimaginably complex that could be the source of consciousness, and that's where these ideas come from. It's completely material kind of thing. Or there's the other perspective, is that consciousness is, from somewhere else. That consciousness is it could be, the consciousness could be the fundamental elements of existence, and that somehow our brains tap into that consciousness
Yeah.
and we're listening to it. And I'm quite comfortable with. I mean, I can't. I'm not leaning on one side or the other. I'm kind of. I think both arguments are plausible, and we just don't. Science doesn't understand yet, and there's no definitive answer to that question. So, regardless of where these ideas come from, I suppose it's like, well, they're either coming from ourselves, like an inner knowing, or they're coming from somewhere else. But it's our job to listen to them and to follow where they're pointing us to, even though it's not always exactly clear where they're pointing us to.
I take the second view of consciousness, and I've been thinking about this for a couple of years, and I'm trying to make sense of this from the standpoint of what I've read and what I've encountered with people.
Mm.
And what I've come, the conclusion that I've come to, that consciousness is the substance of reality,
Mm-hmm.
which is a way of saying what you said, but it functions like a nonverbal language that we're always in communication with. And sometimes it transcends that form of nonverbal nature, which is feeling and sensory, and is exhibited in language.
Yeah.
Like when I heard it's time to stop talking about leadership and lead, I think that was a form of of hearing the conscious world, the unconscious world, coming and speaking to me, and my response is, okay, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the question is, can we trust it? And I can't answer that for anyone.
Well, that's where faith comes in, isn't it?
Yeah.
That listening to that calling, and whether you're whether you're kind of in the first definition of consciousness or the second, I think that it still requires an element of faith. And I think that the whole idea of mastery itself is and involves faith, because it's it's a faith in the process. You're starting out learning you're learning some craft. It could be anything, and you've never encountered it before. Um, you might pick up the drums. I've got a drum kit in the corner over there that you can't see off camera. So, um, you know, you start off and it just feels awkward. You have no idea what you're doing. It sounds terrible, but it might be a bit of fun. And if you're going to get any good, you've got to go through a process of practice.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to put up with the humiliation of sounding terrible. You have to, you have an idea of where you want to get to, and you can see where you are now, and there's a huge gap, and that causes frustration and tension. And it's your job to see that as kind of creative tension that your hard work is going to fill with the faith that if you do the practice, if you do the practice with a certain sense of reverence and surrender and respect, I suppose, for the process, then you have to have faith that it's going to take you to where you think you're going to get to. So, and I think that that's fundamental to the human experience. If you want to optimize the human experience, it involves that element of taking a leap, jumping out of the nest without your wings, putting up with the knocks and the falls,
Yeah.
and following through. Yeah,
This is very Kierkegaardian.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now you're gonna. I've got a Kierkegaard book on my
Now you're
It's
going to go read it.
I've not delved into him much, to be honest. He's kind of the existential sort of way of
Yeah, he's
thinking,
an
isn't it?
existentialist.
Yeah,
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 and
um,
he's writing as a devout Christian,
right.
which also is disruptive to the notion that religion is principally an institutional structure, and instead it's an existential structure. And
Okay, yeah,
and that, I mean, that's the way I read Kierkegaard, and that's the way I treat my own faith is much more existential. And
right. Yeah,
and and so when you talk about faith, you're trusting in something that you can't really know in any absolute sense. There's nothing scientific about it in the sense that, well, if science can actually reach some point of absolute knowledge, which I question, but you see, I think this whole idea of mastery is really a communication with ourselves that's separate from us. Gosh, this is really so bizarre. In a sense, there's a self that exists in that conscious, unconscious world apart from us
yeah,
that
yeah,
is inviting us to come join it, so to speak.
yeah,
And that the appeal is to mastery. The appeal is to be the master of something, and not the master of someone else, but be the master of a skill or a set of ideas or something in our life where we actually are discovering the more of the fullness of life, or the more of the fulfillment of who we are as individuals.
yeah. It's something that I know that I've been quite interested in recently in looking at people's testimonials of near-death experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and often one of the common themes is that they they're told that they need to come back for a reason, for a mission, and that the earth is hard for a reason. Earth is hard because it provides the friction that you need to learn.
Yeah.
And so those the people who have experienced that come back with a renewed sense of a real changed personality and a sense of purpose and mission, and a tolerance of the of real hardship, because they might come back from a car crash and they've got terrible injuries, but they can see the value in those injuries because they're going to learn something in the process. So I think it I could easily conflate the word mastery with just like growth and learning and development,
Right.
because I think that in essence is what it is. So I think um, we are. It's like creativity, creative. No matter whether you're from a religious stance or from an artistic stance or a hard-nosed businessman, the creative force of life is undeniable, and we are motivated and fulfilled when we are creating. And mastery can be applied to your own life as a work of art. We're a blank canvas that that we can use to express a sense of meaning about existence. Our existence, we can get our existential stuff out onto a canvas in the way that we live our lives and our relationships and our impact and influence. And it's all about doing it with intentionality and openness to experience and growth. And that is kind of that's what I sort of conceive of as mastery. So it's a big bucket to.
A decade ago, I was privileged to be the guest at a celebration day of the Laguna tribe in Northwest New Mexico. And the woman who was our host was an artist. And this is one of the last pieces of art that she ever did. She
Okay.
was losing her ability to work. And within another year, she was deceased. She died. And her name was Mrs. Curtis. And all of this is hand drawn, is hand painted,
Wow, wow.
and
It
so
just
when
it looks like it's computer generated. It looks so symmetrical and
yeah, it
realistic.
does.
Yeah, yeah.
But she did this all by hand, and I think about her, and that this is an example of mastery.
Yes, yeah,
This is a visual representation,
yeah.
and I was so honored to be able to buy this. So honored because this is one of her last pieces, and I treasure this because I don't know all the meaning of it. I mean, you see, these are bird feathers here.
Okay, yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know what this means. I just know that I treasure this piece of work. I treasure, but I also feel that way about the things that you're talking about. When people exhibit mastery, whether it's maybe it could be in software development, it could
yeah,
be in a speech that they give, it could be how they've raised their children, it could
yeah.
be any number of things. Um, but I think encouraging people to master something as their contribution to the world, I think is a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think it taps into something that is fundamentally human, and and in a world where I feel like we a lot of people have lost their way to a degree,
Mm-hmm.
and we have lost a certain connection to community and to each other, to work, to nature, to meaning. I think that this is just one way of just basically saying that you know your your hobby might be skateboarding, right? To a lot of people that might be a real pointless, meaningless waste of time. But to the person that's engaged in that process, it means everything to them. And it means falling over and getting hurt, and making tiny adjustments, and seeing over time that they have the power within them to to have increasing control over their thoughts, their body, their emotion, and I think that what you learn on the skateboard, however trivial we might think of it, you can apply that in other areas of your life. And it and I think for that reason that encouraging conversation and introspection, and and supporting and encouraging whatever it is that you feel that is calling you. I think that's what makes for a rich life, a rich society, a rich culture. And um yeah, it's what we gravitate to.
So is playing the piano an area that you're seeking to be a master of?
It's where I'm putting a lot of focus at the moment, but I know that I will never be a virtuoso. Um, but I still, for me, it's a question of that's not my goal. My goal is to feel fairly effortless in um, composing and creating, and playing with other people. And so my real thing is guitar, but I've got a few in the background there. So that's that's where I sort of learned when I was younger, and then more recently I've gravitated towards the piano.
Is there a particular tune that you want to learn to play that kind of is the star out there that you're shooting for?
Um, no, what it is, it's being able to take what's in my head, and to be able to express it without having to think about it. Um, so that I can so that my fingers will go where my brain's going. And I feel that to a degree on the guitar. Um, but I'm finding that the piano is kind of more I'm enjoying the sound of it, and I'm enjoying the precision of the piano. The guitar is quite a you have to work at a guitar. There are so many different ways that you can pluck a string and that you can create a sound and that you can express. It's incredibly expressive instrument. Uh, the piano is it's more predictable how it will respond, I think, and so you can get more. I'm enjoying the experience uh, of yeah, just having a more predictable sound. I think
Yeah.
it's hard to describe, but
Well, I think that just describe it. Well, I have a piano that belonged to my grandparents. It's in storage, and I'm getting ready to pull it out. And I'm moving into a new house in
right,
a couple of weeks, and I'm gonna start taking piano lessons.
wonderful.
Yeah, I yeah, they're
And do you have something in that you would like to play that's in mind? Or...
um, it's ridiculous to say it, but I would like to be able to not so much play it, but learn how Thelonious Monk um, constructed his tunes. On
Okay, that's that's really
wait,
ambitious.
but I want to be able to not play it so much as be able to pick those notes out in sequence and
Yeah,
together, so just so that I can, in some really small way, embody
yeah.
his genius.
Wow, wow. Yeah, that's that's and have you where are you now at the in terms of your capability of playing? What's your history?
I had one piano lesson for my
Right.
mother when I was 10 years old
Okay.
or 11
Okay.
years old.
Yeah.
So I don't, but
Yeah.
I listen to a lot and
Yeah.
I watch, in particular, these classical pianists who are learned on with concertos,
Yeah. Yeah.
and seeing how rapid they are and how precise they are, and I don't have any expectation ever playing that.
Yeah.
I can play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, I'll be happy with that.
Yeah.
But I just want the experience of learning it, and just being able to um, have a reason to practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It,
so
it feels like it almost feels magical sometimes in that you this is what I enjoy about the process. It it's a case of coming to a piece and just not being able to, you have that clumsy feeling, and then you'll make some progress, and then you'll sleep on it, and then in the morning you'll have another go, and suddenly a few things are coming together, so that the very act of sort of leaving it alone, sleeping, whatever might have been going on in your mind, the neurons that fire together, wire together, and are making those connections to enable your motor movements to be more precise, just by a tiny, tiny margin. But that is enough encouragement to then think, okay, I'll I'll keep doing it, and I'll keep practicing. And and there's it, the human mind is so flexible and adaptable
mhm.
that we underestimate what can be achieved just by the sort of compound improvements over time.
That's part of the test that I'm wanting to endeavor. I was at a concert Sunday, um, uh, where Joe Lavana, who's a jazz um, player, a saxophone player,
Right.
was playing with his symphony orchestra a concerto that had been written for him, and they called it a concerto for improvisational saxophone. and it was incredible. It was really quite interesting, quite um, free form. So it wasn't Bach or Brahms or Beethoven or Rachmaninoff. It was something much more contemporary. After that, he did an encore, and he did an improvisation of John Coltrane's "A Love Supreme,"
Mhm.
and I never thought anyone could go beyond what Coltrane had done with that piece of music, but he did, and it was one of and it's another example to me of what mastery can be when you decide that you really want to be a master, and
Yeah.
he is. It was. I don't think I'd ever heard anything quite as extraordinary as I heard, Sunday
Wow.
afternoon. So
Wow. Wow.
so
Yeah.
let's finish by celebrating um I've said two things, of Coltrane and Joe Lovano and Thelonious Monk as kind of people who set a goal or a standard for me for mastery. Who is it that you look to as kind of I want I'm going not so much try to be them, but I'm going to let them be my motivation, my inspiration for this kind of thing.
I think I think that my muse or my inspiration as a person, I tend to try to avoid having heroes and putting people on a pedestal.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but with one exception, and I think for me that's been Hendrix.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I think that not only in terms of his virtuosity as a player, but also in terms of his creativity in what he was doing with the technology at the time and his lyrical, poetic capability and fundamentally his humility and his authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
So he would have, he emerged onto the scene when he was, 23, 24, died when he was 27, and but had something. He had a gift that he had a muse that he was listening to, and he would almost talk in those terms. I mean, I know that he would partake in the drugs that on the sort of psychedelic scene at the time. So a lot of LSD and psilocybin and everything that was going around then. And but he also seemed to be tapping into um, something that he needed to express and get out
Mm-hmm.
in a truly authentic way. So I would say, Hendrix, not for his virtuosity, not for his music so much as his attitude, his kind of his devotion to getting to his message of which was very much of the time, that kind of peace, love, um, connection, freedom, that essence that he was trying to express and how he captured the human experience in the most colorful ways possible on his musical instrument.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I agree with you. Well,
Cool.
John, it's been great having you on here. This has been fantastic. Um, appreciate what you're doing, and I hope that people that hear this or see this will take to heart the opportunity that they have to begin to practice mastery in whatever way that they feel they can.
Yeah, and I'm equally interested in learning other people's perspectives, interests, and experiences, and having that conversation so that I can sort of learn and delve a little bit deeper.
Well, we'll certainly put whatever you want in terms of contact information in the show notes so that if people wanted to reach out to you and have some interaction with you, that can happen.
Cool.
And anything you want, just let me know. And I thank you for being here. It's been fantastic.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Ed. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes, for both of us, both of us.
Great.
And I hope so it has been for you all. Thank you for watching the Eddie Network podcast. Please sign up, hit the like button. And if you have a comment, leave a comment. And I'm grateful for you watching and listening. And we'll look forward to seeing you again here next time when the Eddie Network podcast gathers. Thank you, and I'll see you. Bye-bye.